effectively. But programmatically now, how do we generate that string among all of these options selectively? In other words, as I'm spitting out or generating in my PHP code this drop-down menu, I need to pause with some kind of if condition or branch and say, wait a minute, if this is what the user selected, I need to reselect this for him or her by spitting out precisely that HTML. So let's take a look at version 6 then here of Frosh IMs. So notice at the very top, we have a bunch of comments as before, but I've introduced a new feature that you might have seen already in pset 7, that of arrays that can be declared using literally a function called array. So frankly, this is kind of a nasty piece of syntax in PHP that you can't just declare an array with square brackets or some other syntax, as we even could in C, but instead you have to literally call a function called array. But again, this is simply the way it is. So $dorms, I've capitalized just to convey the idea here that this is a global array that I'm going to be using everywhere. But it's just a variable storing this array of elements. So PHP supports normal arrays, bracket 0, bracket 1, bracket 2. So this is not an associative array. This is just an array. And I've hit enter on every line just to keep it more readable. So notice at the end, I have close paren, semicolon, to end the function call. So stored in this moment in time, then, in this variable, is that whole array. So this is all copy-paste from earlier. I'm just making sure the user has actually submitted all of the fields I care about. So let's see now how I'm generating the HTML. Well, if I scroll down here, notice that captain and gender are actually the same. But look how much more elegant now the dorm generation is. So I have a new construct that we predicted would come a couple days ago, which is the for each construct. I have this inside of open bracket question mark, which says to the web server, here's some PHP code. Don't spit this out. Interpret it instead. The syntax for this loop is for each variable name as other variable name. So the array comes first and then a temporary variable. We could call this anything we want, but you might as well choose something that's a little more friendly. And then notice the colon here. And this is important because the moment you close PHP mode here, stuff's just going to start getting spit out raw. So you need to just be clear to PHP that what follows is actually inside of conceptually this loop. And then notice the opposite of this is the somewhat verbosely named end for each with no space. So alternatively, you could do something C style. You could actually say, well, open curly brace and then close curly brace here. So this would actually be fine as well. It just looks a little uglier, perhaps. But either style's fine so long as you are consistent. Then what are we doing here? Well, notice this is not inside of PHP mode. So that means if we're inside of this loop, this stuff's just going to get spit out, literally. So open bracket, option, value equals quote. And then we get back into PHP mode. And then we exit PHP mode, close quote, close bracket, open PHP mode. And we spit out dorm again. Recall the redundancy of the way I structure this. End PHP mode. And then raw HTML again. But I'm not doing something here. I'm kind of skipping a step I thought I just insisted was important, which is I'm not escaping dorm here. Why not? Yeah. Oh, sure. Oh, OK. What's that? Yeah, that's it. It's as simple as that, right? If I am the one who created this list of elements, I don't really need to call a function and incur the slight computational cost of actually executing a function just to escape a string that I myself wrote. Now, if you really wanted to be paranoid and not even trust yourself or the person you're working with, you could certainly do this. But realize the distinction here is as simple as, well, this array was from me, not from the user. So now we have the ability to dynamically generate this list. We're not doing any kind of ifs or else yet to actually see which the user has already submitted. So the end result is actually going to be pretty similar. If I go to froshims6.php in my browser, damn it, that's the mistake David forgot to fix since Monday. So we're going to cheat and copy this, put this over here. And how about by next week, we'll fix that problem. Just like the Wi-Fi question I keep forgetting to ask. So let's go. That was not intended to be a running gag. All right, so here we go. Oh, and now I messed up my formatting, so that's all right. So here we go. Simulate correctness. So do as I say, not as I do. All right, so now I can go ahead and type David, and I can click register. And I'm actually still going to get yelled at here, but the menu is still the same. It's not pre-populated yet, but if I actually look at the page source by right-clicking or control-clicking, I at least see the HTML that I saw before. Now, there's a little more white space this time and some weird indentation. And again, this is not a big deal. Your output does not need to be pretty printed, but your actual PHP code and HTML you write should be. But this is now machine generated. And in fact, if you start looking at the source code of most websites, you'll see patterns like this, where it's all indented identically. And that's not because a human necessarily did that. It's because there's some programming code, some PHP or whatnot, that's spitting this out in some kind of loop. So I need to be able to ask myself the question, if what I'm about to spit out in this drop-down menu is equal to what the user typed in or selected, I need to reselect it for him or her. So let's go ahead and open up Frosh IMs 7 now. And we see the same array of dorms up top. We see the same error checking code at top. And if I scroll down now, notice that I've done something slightly different, and realize there's a bunch of different ways to do this. And you'll see different ways in section and in online tutorials. But here, notice that just to keep things prettier, I've only entered PHP mode once at the very top, and then I'm closing it down here, just because, frankly, if you start going in and out of PHP mode, it just gets hard to read. So I decided to write this all in one big for loop. So we have the same looping structure for each dorms as dorm. And then, frankly, this is week 1 stuff again. It's a different language, but same idea. If what the user submitted, which recall is stored inside of a special super global variable called $_post, equals the value of the current dorm, as we are looping through all of them, we'll then go ahead and spit out literally option selected equals quote unquote selected, value equals quote unquote dorm, then close option, close quote, semicolon. And now notice this. This is C stuff also. If I've got double quotes on the outside, I have to have single quotes on the inside. Or what else could I do to avoid confusing the interpreter by having weird quotes in the middle of quotes? You could escape it, right? Almost, when in doubt, you can do something like \quote, and that would also get the job done as well. Frankly, it's just a little harder to read, so you might as well toggle in and out of single quotes. Else, if the user did not type in the current element, just go ahead and spit this out instead. So again, week 1 stuff sort of updated for PHP. So let's now go back to the browser. This is version 7. Let me go ahead and open up froshims7.php. And let me go ahead and learn from my past mistakes. Let's go back to 6. All right. All right. All right. And reload. Problem solved. David was from Matthews. I'm going to skip gender and captain. Register. I'm yelled at, but notice what did not break this time. Now Matthews is pre-selected, and if I go into my source code, view page source, scroll down here, voila, it's not being formatted as nicely now because I'm not printing out white space, but that's fine too. In fact, we're saving some bytes this way. But if I scroll right to Matthews, notice that Matthews does look a little different, and that's it. So again, we're really using PHP now to dynamically generate HTML to structure and stylize our page as we see fit. Any questions? Anything at all? All right. Yeah?
Did you explain what echo meant?
Oh, did I explain what echo meant? No. So sorry, I took for granted what echo meant. And it really means kind of what the word suggests, echo this literally. So it's actually synonymous with saying print. However, echo is just a built-in option in PHP. So I could either say print and print this out. And let me scroll back to the left. Or you can say echo. They're pretty much equivalent. And in fact, you don't actually need the parenthesis for the echo call, which is perhaps useful for some folks. So good question there. Other questions? Yeah?
Where did you introduce the lowercase dorm variable?
Good question. Where did I introduce the lowercase dorm variable? It was implicitly declared inside of the for each construct itself. So the moment I mention it after the keyword as, it comes into existence. And it automatically gets updated on every iteration of the loop. All right, so recall that where we left off on Monday was with this slightly more exciting example, in that we generated emails automatically for Frosh IMs 8. And if we scroll down here, notice that we see the same HTML because this form submits to register 8. And recall that, oh, this was not the email example. This was instead the database example. So recall what we actually did with the data here. So let's focus now on the top, which was just some error checking. And below that was the database connection. So there's a couple of things going on here. We mentioned when we first started talking about the internet that a single server can certainly do multiple things these days. It can be a web server, email server, instant messaging server. And so when a packet of data arrives at some server on the internet, how does the server know if it is an email or web page request or instant message? What was the underlying technology that answered questions of that form? Yeah. Yeah, so it was a port number, right? We talked briefly, and we had this fun video talking about IP and TCP. And TCP was simply the protocol that says, one, if data gets dropped somewhere along the way, TCP is responsible for resending it. But TCP was also responsible for assigning a number to most services on the internet. Like web is 80 by convention, and also 443, which is the SSL or HTTPS version. More on that today. 25 is email. 22 is something called SSH. 21 is something called FTP and the like. So upon receiving some packet and seeing, OK, this is for my IP address, and it's for port 80, the web server knows that this is indeed for him. But in this case, there's another something running on the server. In this case, the appliance, but it could be an actual server on the internet. And that's something called a MySQL server, a database server whose purpose in life is to listen for connections, listen for requests for databases, and then listen for things like insert and delete and select and the like. So if we look here at these first two lines, the first line is literally doing that, having my PHP code open in connection, a network connection to the local host using username jharvard and password crimson. In theory, the server could be elsewhere on the internet, but because MySQL traffic is not encrypted by default, it's not a good idea to try to connect to a database server elsewhere on the internet from your own web server. So they're usually in the same company, in the same building or the like, or literally on the same machine, as is the case here. So what we next do is we select a very specific database. This is like opening a specific Excel file on your desktop, even though you might have multiple ones. And then we have to get into this habit of avoiding dangerous input, scrubbing input, or error checking, really. So notice I'm calling this a very long named function, which really does something as simple as anytime it sees like a quote mark, it makes it backslash quote mark, and a couple of other things. Very simple things so that you're not accidentally tricked into executing a delete statement or an update statement or something potentially dangerous. I don't have to bother scrubbing the captain input because remember, captain is a checkbox, and so its value is going to be nothing at all, or it's going to be quote unquote on. So I'm not even passing the user's input literally. I'm just checking implicitly if the captain field has something in it. Go ahead and set captain to 1, else set captain to 0. And then I'm just going to literally insert my own 1 or 0. Gender I do want to scrub because the user is submitting either M or F, and I don't want them potentially to submit something other than those. And then here too, with MySQL real escape string, I'm making sure that the dorm the user has submitted is also legitimate. Now, why is this even a concern? If we go to the web page, right, the only values I can choose from are those here in the dropdown. But we saw very simple examples of this the other day. If I right-click or control-click on this, recall that there's this inspect element option, thanks to a free plugin called Firebug. This lets me do a bunch of things. For one thing, it, remember, cleans up your HTML, makes it nicely indented, and you can expand and collapse it, which just makes it user-friendly to navigate and poke around. But you can literally change things in the web page, not permanently, but on my own computer. So I could actually change Matthews to be something like University Hall is where I live, and we'll change this to be University Hall, and then I go back here, and voila, I've changed the form. So now all I have to do is click submit, and even though the web server did not design for University Hall to be in this list, what's going to get submitted is University Hall. Now this is kind of innocuous and silly, but what if I instead did something in my HTML like, well, not University Hall, but maybe something like a quote mark and then delete from users, enter. Oh, now the quote mark. Let's get rid of the quote mark because I just broke my own HTML attack. So let's just simulate it with delete, OK? So this is an oversimplification. It's not sufficient just to send delete to the server, but it's this easy to actually change the web page. And frankly, real hackers don't go using these free GUI tools and changing the HTML. You would actually write a program, a little PHP script, like we did on Monday, for doing spell checking in PHP, and you can simulate being a web browser. In fact, recall that from one of the survey from problem set 5, where we asked you guys to gripe about things that could be better on campus, one of the top contenders